and welcome all. Thank you for joining me and having patience tonight, investing your time here instead of drinking a beer. Highly appreciate that. Or you're drinking beer here, that's even better. So, did you know that these kind of slides actually help speakers? So it's usually not about self-entertainment, it's kind of getting us into the talking flow. So the first couple of minutes on stage, even for experienced speakers, usually are a little bit challenging. So this lets us talk about a topic that we know pretty well. The more you mature and the more talks you actually give, the less important the slides become. What I do want you to take with you tonight, though, is that you can talk to me. So there's my email address on here, there's like social media handles, and I'm actually a big fan of talking to people. So if there's something I haven't addressed, if there's something you want to talk about, find me here. I can promise I'm just a normal guy. I speak German and English, so don't even be afraid of approaching me. And if you can't get enough about my kind of like talking, and I did also write a little bit, so one or two things. And most of the books that I did write in the past are actually available for free, at least as a PDF edition. So you just need to stay until the very end when I'm going to share the link to the WeAreDevelopers program. So much to get into the flow. This is one of the slides that I updated yesterday, I think. You've all seen this, right? Am I assuming that there's nobody here who has not seen this? So this is the CNCF landscape. So everything that a cloud-native capable developer should actually be able to do. So if you know some of this, like a fraction even, you still can absolutely call yourself a full-stack developer, proudly. This is, to a certain extent, mind-blowing because it grew over time. I do actually have an old slide, and it still reminds me of this episode of Sunny in Philadelphia. If I have to explain even one of these concepts in university when I give a lecture or like try to mentor one of our younger colleagues, it always feels like very complex and interconnected, in our world at least. Can somebody do me a favor and start the timer, please? Thank you. So what are the real challenges? Like, complexity obviously is a challenge. But why does it become a challenge? Not only for us as like developers, but also for our employers or our customers. The first thing that comes to mind is technical debt, right? So whatever we do over time that gets removed, changed, updated, or even not, basically leads to a certain amount of modernization. And if you're talking to people today, the biggest challenge they have, especially customers who are very mature in their software development life cycles, is getting old stuff updated. Daniel was talking about modern approaches to modernization, but this is still a really interesting topic. So I'm talking not about AI today. So this is because I felt envy. I actually wear an AI t-shirt, and I have it on one slide. And this is kind of the other thing that is breaking into our software development processes. So how do we use this? Also a big motivational factor for everybody looking into new solutions to software projects, either new ones to start or existing ones. But we also have this topic of developer productivity, because developers are comparably expensive. So many companies are starting to realize that it might actually be helpful if developers can focus on things that they love doing instead of focusing on, let's say, infrastructure configuration or specific vendor SDKs. So I mean, I have another slide that you're all going to love in the middle, probably, but it's probably going to talk about how I see myself as a developer a little bit more. And this impressive 742% software supply chain, that is a complete different thing, right? if we're thinking about signing our artifacts in a cloud-native infrastructure environment, if we're thinking about signing our code commits, that's already kind of challenging if we want to have them verified. But thinking about the full software development lifecycle, so these are like the 4 big buckets that companies are really struggling with these days. And I have to admit, this is how I envision software projects. Like when I look at something new, it's open source or closed source even, or like individually developed stuff. This is how I kind of envision projects. The project itself, the definition is the big block in the middle. There's a bunch of people, and they are trying to push this up the hill. You all have heard about Sisyphus, so I'm not going to talk about it. But I give it another spin for you to be a little bit more entertaining. Make a guess. Who's that guy? Talk to me. Don't sleep. Scream. CEO? OK. Don't like that. New approach. Customer? Meh. Not bad. Again? Project manager? No. Seriously, guys? That's operations. Like, they are trying to prevent any creativity to get into production. So that's kind of the safeguarding function in many, many big enterprises. And I do get it, right? I mean, they need to make sure whatever is in production actually runs and fulfills certain non-functional and functional requirements. So let's try again. Who's that guy? It's not the CEO. What, sales? Oh, come on, seriously. So I get project manager a lot because it's additional weight on top, right? I can follow that argumentation. But there's one hint here, the direction that guy is looking into. It's backwards, right? So that has to be an architect. Definitely. I mean, there's no other explanation. Sorry. So, and who's that? What? Junior developer carrying all the load. Very good explanation. I heard a couple of others. So one was, that is actually the database admin because he's carrying all the load. So maybe it's an alternative. It could also be the senior guy in the team who's like pushing everything upwards instead of forwards. I don't know. But this kind of is a reality in many enterprises. And I do know if I like ask for a show of hands, you all do DevOps, you're all in like 2 pizza teams, you're all super agile. Let me tell you, that is not the truth for all the big enterprises out there. And if you're talking to like really large software projects, this is a lot closer to the reality how it looks like out there. We still have that wall of confusion, and we still have software teams trying to throw shit over that wall into production, hoping it land well. And we all know how that ends, right? In endless struggles. We really do not want to use this kind of approach. This is ultimately why DevOps kind of was invented, right? So we're aiming for a partnership in software development within a super complex world, which basically means that we now, as developers, not only focus on technical frameworks to actually make applications work, we also have to focus on the ops pieces and bring these applications into production. So man, that is looking scary, but okay, I'll take it. If I get the crown for it, okay, maybe like let the team be kings. I'm a team player, okay? We all should be team players. So maybe, if we're lucky enough, that actually is going to work. And maybe, if we're also lucky enough, that security guy is still sitting in that corner and not lurking out and coming up with pen test ideas or whatever. So I deliberately do not look at security, but I do hint at some paths forward where this could actually also become easier. Who remembers this? None of you? I stumbled over it by accident because I was kind of researching where this term DevOps kind of originated. We all work with it. We talk to our managers about it, and we tell them we want to be super agile. Let's just do everything and go off my back. No operations whatsoever. So that actually originated very, very long ago when Flickr was still a thing. And when they had to scale Flickr, like this photo sharing website. Is anybody still using this? Natalie, yeah, fair, I get it. But that's like an original source. This is the slide that kicked off the DevOps movement, and basically another representation of this wall of confusion kind of scenario, right? I found that interesting. So what is that? DevOps means you build it and you run it. And if we look at this security guy in the left little corner, that also means that security and everything needs to shift left, which is another word of shifting left in the software development lifecycle. That means it lands in our labs. Oof. It's getting more instead of less, right? So I talked about developers loving to code. That's still not it, right? I mean, yes, we do love code, and we want to focus on implementing fancy business logic. If you ask me about my favorite business logic, it's actually finance math. I had the pleasure of working with a consultancy who was building calculation kernels for long-running portfolio calculations. That stuff is amazing, and I could focus on it all day long. But that was definitely not what I had to do, because there's also a ton of definitions and YAMLs and stuff that I actually need to put into production, right? So it's a ton of confusion at the end of the day. And I think the one thing that kind of is making the rounds, coming from McKinsey and others, is the term cognitive load. So this, when I have to explain this to my kids, I basically always do the like exploding head emoji. That is something that they can actually relate to. So yes, this is our reality in everyday life. We have just too much on our plate. And if I do a little bit more history lessons here, and I'm deliberately not revealing which time frame I actually started developing, and it actually also does not include any LLM stuff. So I said I'm not going to talk that much about AI, so I kind of stopped 2023, so ignoring all the hypes. But if that is a ton of stuff. Like who feels at home on the very right side of the slide? Not a lot of Java developers here, a couple of at least, right? So it's a ton of stuff that we need to be able to work with. Honestly, if we're taking the step back and look at bigger software projects and enterprises, this approach does not work. Like who has ever worked in DevOps teams in larger enterprises knows that they have a tendency to grow. And that tendency is definitely beyond the 2 pizza team size. Or they are starting to replicate these pizza teams. And what actually happens is what I call technology drift. Because every team starts to develop their own kind of specialties, their own kind of solutions to problems. One team is embarking on function as a service. The other team is embarking on container workloads that scale on Kubernetes. And there's a large variety if I just look back at the landscape for CNCF, right? There's a ton of stuff. And for enterprises, this actually is weird in many ways. The individual teams might be happy. But as soon as somebody has to move teams, everything changes over and over again. So there's a constant kind of like challenge that you have to keep up with the amount of technologies being in use. And that is actually a reality, in particular for large organizations. If you're in a small consultancy, if you're a very, very good team, and if you're applying all the shift left and DevOps principles, don't even think about changing it. If you're happy, stay happy. I'm a big fan of happiness because that makes the world roll. So what we're talking about today is definitely about scaling these methodologies into something that is way bigger. So software engineering organizations, around 50 to 100 and even more developers. This is one of the approaches that you will find if you search for the keyword integrated developer platform. And this is an opinionated version. Obviously, it comes from Red Hat. What is not opinionated is the architectural style. So the different layers you see here, starting with developer experience, going all the way down to the execution environments, that is what the platformengineering.org kind of is trying to push forward as the reference architecture. And they do offer reference architectures not only for OpenShift and Red Hat, but also for AWS and Azure, so you're more than welcome to join the community. I personally believe that Slack channel is a little light right now, but it has over 13K people in it. So if you really want to learn stuff, start asking questions there. Highly encourage you. What makes me wonder about this slide is the fun part is that developer experience comes down to IDEs, to source code control clients, and maybe to something that is mentioned as Developer Hub in this case, but who's using Backstage? Anybody? So that's what a developer portal is in this kind of user experience approach. And Backstage is basically meant to replace all your different browser tabs into one big application. So that's what the Red Hat Developer Hub is. Backstage is an upstream project. Also, if you look close enough, you will find it as a little bubble on the CNCF landscape. So it's basically meant as the one-stop shop for all your developer needs. So what does it mean? Instead of having a separate browser window for your GitHub repository, for your Jenkins jobs, maybe for other continuous integration systems, and your environments, all this gets kind of pulled into one central place. And that is actually a really cool feature. So if you want to play around with it, I think this is the tweet I mentioned. Every software engineer's dream. Goat farm. Yes, I personally am dreaming about a cabin in the woods with fiber. That would be my favorite, to just not have to deal with anything except the internet from time to time. And I think there's so much truth to this, and it's not even that old. Just 2 years by now. Simon, a really good friend of mine, put it another way. He said, if we would actually invest our time and effort into like the foundational technologies, programming languages, data stores, instead of mingling around with YAML and trying to understand the big configuration picture of applications and infrastructures mostly, we would be so much more efficient. They both have a point, and I kind of, again, I really lovely recall the finance mathematics that I was working on, and that made me happy. So how do we get there? I'm thinking it takes a ton. But why do we care, and why does our management care? And here's the secret. So this is the slide that you can actually share with your bosses. Because whatever makes developers happy does not only makes code better, it also makes us faster. And ultimately, if you look at the very bottom of this slide that is not only half visible down there, this is a McKinsey study that this quote came from. So take this, take a picture, take it to your bosses and tell them, see, if I'm happy, you will be more productive. You have more output, better results. So definitely worthwhile trying if you are arguing for anything new. What I think is really necessary, it's not only about people and the individual technologies. To make developers happy, we need to have a cohesive approach to all these technologies. And I think this cohesive approach is a platform, is something that really builds on top of each other with all relevant layers as outlined by the platform engineering org. And you guys need to really think about how this could make your lives easier instead of mingling around with all the individual tools and trying to build your way through the challenges that operations gives you. So platform engineering, I think, is at the very bottom a way to scale DevOps in larger enterprises. And we're really scratching the very top right now, so just a little bit of positioning. I do acknowledge that it's half as cool as AI and LLMs, but it basically still is the foundation that keeps everything running, and it will not lose traction or even relevance in the time of AI, because AI technically presents another challenge in technology options that we have to choose from. You have to choose which kind of integration you want for your Java libraries, what kind of architectures to use, what models to use. All this needs to be incorporated and ultimately deliver this glue in between what my bosses and your bosses usually only look at. So they only look at business value. But if we peel this down a little bit more into the technical direction, we'll end up somewhere in between. We have the technical platforms underneath, but everything else builds up all the way to developer experience and our happiness by building solutions that actually work. There's another way to look at this, and I'm kind of outing me as Lord of the Rings fan here. I know that there was only one ring of power with the Lord of the Rings, but I like to see what we do as like the combination of two rings. Actually, the developer side, the inner loop kind of experience that needs to be seamless. If you followed through today here and in other places around Red Hat Technologies, you might have heard about awesome stuff like Podman Desktop. So if you haven't looked at Podman Desktop so far, that is a really neat containerization experience that brings you all the way from containers to pods to Kubernetes. And on the right hand, when we're talking about the outer loop, when we're talking about infrastructure productization, there's also a lot of technologies that technically do not add to what developers really would want to do, but they still need to be managed in our teams. So you need a platform engineering approach, somebody who is actually breaking this down the way we as developers can use it. And that is why I also call platform engineers the developer's developer. Sounds a little weird, but it actually tells the story of what I'm advocating for. So how do you get to play around with what I've so boldly described? One opportunity is that you can actually use the free and open developer sandbox, which is like a hosted version of OpenShift. It has a little bit of resources that you can play around with for 30 days. There is no strings attached, which basically means you just go and play around with the technologies available. There's a ton of operators pre-installed. I'm not going to walk you through. This is more like for your personal reference here, just so you know you can definitely use a lot of features that OpenShift technically comes with. And to not let you just stumble around in an empty OpenShift cluster, we do also have a ton of prepackaged learning paths, which is basically a guided experience that you can start reading and start exploring at the same time. And whenever you get a chance to grab the slides after this talk, you'll always find these little 8-character big URLs or further information down there. I call them homework because it's kind of what I would like you to do. If anything of this was of interest to you, just take a look at the slides afterwards, go explore these learning paths on your own whenever you want to learn a little bit around the technologies we've been talking about. You'll find a lot of these little footnotes in all slide decks of my colleagues here. So this is about installing the developer portal, Red Hat Developer Hub. We also have a more advanced learning path. This talks about software templates and in more detail about the plugins available that are being exposed. Just to get that straight, we're not talking product, right? So Backstage is an upstream solution that you can also use on your local laptop and run as Node.js. That seems unreasonably complex, so you can use it pre-packaged and potentially support it on OpenShift directly here. And if you prefer reading, you've probably seen this little printout at our booth already. So this is a full-blown book that you can read and download for free. All we're asking for is basically your email address. You need to register and make sure to become part of the Red Hat Developers program. There's a ton of other books, including mine and Natalie's. Natal is already on his way out. He has had another couple of sessions today, too. We did talk a little bit about modernizing enterprise Java, what Daniel showed earlier, without the LLM magic, and with a little bit more Java and a little bit more source code, ultimately. So give this a read. It's actually a real O'Reilly book, so all for you for free. This is where I said you can go register and be happy for free, no strings attached. Just make sure to check out everything we offer, which is not only ebooks, but also trial versions of all the packages that we deliver as productized open source projects. What did I miss? More learning path. So I only highlighted 2, but there's a ton more, even technology-based. So if you're interested just in Argo or in Tecton pipelines, you will get a ton of information to start with. What is super important to me personally is to remind all of us, you need to close your tabs. I talked about happiness, I talked about complexity and mental load. Please take that serious. There is a time to actually update your browser, close all the tabs, and lose everything and take some free time and have a beer. And I think that is what I would like you to take with you tonight. Thank you for your attention. Please stay for my colleague Don, who's going to walk you through .NET, if you're interested in .NET. So thank you for your attention. Have a wonderful rest of the night. And let me know if you have any questions, online or offline.